Hey everyone, this is Austin Lyons from Chipstrat and Creative Strategies. Let's discuss AMD's Accelerator business, Instinct. My Chipstrat article goes deeper than I will here, so visit chipstrat.com to read it. Let's jump in. Okay, first, you may have seen this image before. This is AMD's estimate for the data center AI accelerator TAM, or total addressable market, which they estimated to be $500 billion in 2028. Very exciting, right? Even more exciting, that's a 60% CAGR, compounded annual growth rate. So everyone got excited about this, and the investment community interpreted this slide as AMD's Instinct business will grow 60% annually. Now, will it? That's tough to live up to. In fact, on AMD's most recent earnings call within the past couple of weeks, they did not break out Instinct revenue. Of course, this invited many questions from the analysts on the call and also in the conversation afterward. Why not? Why not break out? Why stop breaking out Instinct revenue? Has something changed in management's long-term view? Is the TAM not as big as we think? Or is 60% too high of a number for AMD Instinct to grow? And of course, if it's not 60%, what is it? Is it 50%? 40%? Really, let's boil it down. Should we be bullish or bearish on Instinct? So for the people who are bears today, the quick naive bull case goes something like this. Nvidia had a GPU monopoly because they were first. And now AMD's Instinct is here and the silicon looks good. So surely hyperscalers will start to buy Instinct as well to reduce their reliance on Nvidia and reduce Nvidia's pricing power. Yet, once you stop and think about it, bears have many valid counter arguments. So the first argument is something like this. An instinct-based AI system is not a comparable substitute to an NVIDIA system. So we're talking about systems, not chips. An AI system is the sum of its parts. It's software, it's hardware, it's networking. And they say AMD's overall system performance isn't comparable, especially for training. Secondly, the second common argument you'll hear is that NVIDIA's inertia is too strong. NVIDIA's installed base is massive. The software tooling is easy to use. Why switch to AMD? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then as this slide points out, this is NVIDIA's roadmap, and you can see, just like look at 2026. You've got the new Rubin GPU with HBM4. You've got a new Vera CPU. You've got new switches. So the communication technology is getting better. And so the argument here is, look, the goalposts are moving. AMD not only has to catch up, but then they have to keep up. And of course, AMD is way smaller than NVIDIA. So that would mean AMD can catch up and they can keep up basically just punching above their weight as a much smaller company, much less free cash flow to spend on R&D investments. And then the bears don't stop. They continue. Hey, NVIDIA's previous gen instances, what if those are cost competitive with AMD? Why switch if let's say you're cost optimizing inference? Should I switch to AMD and take all that effort to move over? Or what if I just stick with NVIDIA's previous gen instances? So I took a screenshot here. I think this was Vast.ai maybe. But if you look at these Hopper rental prices, in light of Blackwell ramping, we're seeing these rental prices go below $2 an hour, which is what some people estimate is where these companies who rent out these GPUs need to be to break even. So we're talking $1.50, $1.75 an hour. So the bears would say, what if for some customer workloads, inference in particular, what if Hopper's actually good enough for a while? And so no need to switch to cost optimize. And then finally, lastly, there's this big discussion about custom AI ASICs or XPUs. And these are totally in the limelight right now after Broadcom's earnings back in December, I think it was. And the bear case for AMD Instinct goes as follows. Yes, of course, customers want to reduce NVIDIA's pricing power, but who says customers will reach for another GPU? What if instead they reach for an AI ASIC or an XPU? I mean, after all, isn't that what's happening with Google's TPU, Meta's MTIA, Amazon's Trainium and Inferentia, and Microsoft's Maya? So at this point, wow, the bears have a lot of good arguments. They've established that AMD Instinct has to battle next-gen NVIDIA. It has to battle previous-gen NVIDIA, has to battle hyperscaler ASICs or XPUs, and they have to move as fast as NVIDIA. And so one wonders, is there a future for AMD Instinct, or is this simply an NVIDIA market, or maybe NVIDIA and XPUs? All right, so let's take a long-term view and we'll walk through the AMD puts. There are legitimate reasons to be optimistic in the long run. But the first point I want to make is that the bull's timing is way too optimistic. So take server x86 server CPUs as an analogy. How long did it take AMD to chip away at Intel's x86 share? 20 quarters or more, depending on how you count it. That's 5 years. What makes anyone think AI accelerators will be different, let alone faster, right? Shouldn't it take 5 years? I mean, shouldn't that be what we're expecting? So the good news is it's the investors who have this timing wrong or aren't patient, have a short-term view. It's not Lisa. You can go see this Stratechery post from Ben Thompson where he interviewed Lisa back in June of 2024. I think maybe it was after Computex. I can't quite recall. But anyway, Lisa said, yes, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. This AI thing, it's a 10-year arc. We're a year and a half into it. You know, it's going to take time. And they understand that their roadmap will take time too. And they have to sell the whole roadmap. It's not just about the first chip. So let's take this long-term mindset as Lisa and AMD are doing. What arguments can we make for Instinct making strides in the long run? Okay, first, hyperscaler AIs or XPUs are not a perfect substitute for GPUs. They can definitely work, but you're accepting trade-offs, and it's not clear that companies will always want to accept these trade-offs. Now, let's get into this. And I think a lot of investors miss this because it's technical and nuance. So let me try to take a nuanced and technical explanation to help people understand. And again, this was the quote from Hock Tan, Broadcom CEO, that everyone kind of took as gospel, but we need to unpack it. So, if you look, Tan says that in 2027, there will be 3 hyperscalers that each deploy 1 million plus XPU clusters. Is that even possible? Well, okay. The largest GPU buyers today are Microsoft, AWS, Meta, and Google, and they're all making their own XPUs. So there could be some credence to this. But why are these companies buying GPUs in the first place? It's for pre-training scaling. So they use these GPU clusters. They buy 1,000, and then they buy 10,000, and then they buy 40,000. But like we talked about, of course, scaling is hitting a plateau, it's bottlenecked by data. Now they can use these GPU clusters for inference too, but inference demand is only beginning to ramp. Now, Google Gemini does do training on TPUs, and AWS has a significant Trainium Inferentia install base and recently announced that they're working on a cluster of hundreds of thousands of Trainium 2, which Anthropic will use to train Claude. So on the one hand, maybe just looking at the installed base, Google and AWS could get to 1 million ASICs. It's not hard to go from hundreds of thousands to 1 million, especially over the time, in the next 3 years, 2 to 3 years. But what else needs to be true for this to happen? Just because 2 of them have it and you can see a path there doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. So first of all, scaling laws must continue. Ilya recently said that pre-training scaling has hit a data bottleneck. And we know that hardware scaling, during pre-training anyway, won't drive progress without fresh training data. If you've got a lot more compute, but no new data, your brain, the model doesn't get any smarter. There's nothing new to learn from. Secondly, there's a question of, will LLM training shift from GPUs to XPUs? Again, we definitely see it for Gemini, and it totally works for them. Now, I don't think Claude has actually been trained on Trainium yet. And so although AWS is building these massive Trainium 2 clusters, it's not quite clear yet if that will be comparable to NVIDIA performance. But let's assume it is. It probably is, right? So let's assume it is. So let's assume you've got Google training Gemini on TPUs, and you've got Anthropic training Claude on Trainium 2s. Who's the third one? Who's the third company? Okay, so let's take a look at Meta. Meta's NTIA chip so far has only been articulated as the most efficient architecture for Meta's unique workloads. And specifically, the unique workload that they're talking about is deep learning recommendation models. So if the chip is designed for deep learning recommendation, it's not quite clear that transformer LLMs on these chips will be any faster than on GPUs, any more performant. Now, hey, if it's the same level of performant for training or close enough, there's probably a serious TCO optimization since you're not paying NVIDIA's margins. But it's still not clear that Meta plans on training Gen AI on their Trainium 2 or on their MTIA chips. Now, if it's not training, then what is it? Or is Hawk implying that there'll be massive inference demand by 2027? Or maybe these million clusters are some mix of still lots of training, but also growing amount of them are used for inference. After all, there are inference scaling laws that we're seeing, especially with these reasoning models. And optimistically, we should have much higher demand by then. Oh, which, by the way, okay, talking about Gen AI on MTIA, I went to Meta's career page to see if I could find anything. I searched Gen AI, LLMs, MTIA, and the first job on the left talks about Gen AI and LLMs specifically on NVIDIA clusters. It talks about a team that owns the stack around NVIDIA's Nickel library, which is a communications library for distributed training, having nodes talk to other nodes during training. So that's like, +1 vote for NVIDIA just staying as the training hardware of choice. Interestingly, the second job here on the right gives hints of an LLM on MTIA, LLM training on MTIA. Specifically, it says maximizing training performance of Gen AI and recommendation models on Meta's custom accelerators. And then interestingly, later in the article, it talks about the collectives and communication team that helps develop, tune, and optimize libraries for NVIDIA GPUs, MTIA accelerators, and AMD GPUs. So let's see which hand. Right here, AMD GPUs. So don't read it too much, but I thought it was pretty interesting that AMD is making the careers page for Meta. So one more thing to point out from those Meta jobs is they're talking about, we need to write software for communication between the nodes in the training cluster, which is a reminder that XPUs have to compete at a systems level. So just like AMD has to compete against NVIDIA, not just at a chip level, but at a systems level, networking, scale up, scale out, software, developer ecosystem, so too do XPUs. And it's not clear yet that XPUs are competitive end to end, at least according to this executive's take, which it looks like I'm standing in the way. You can go to chipstrat.com to find the source for that. It was from a Morgan Stanley research report, I believe. Okay, back to this slide. So point number 3, are companies willing to accept the risk trade-offs of XPUs? So yes, custom ASICs definitely will have significantly better power, performance, and cost efficiency for specific workloads. But of course, this is at the cost of flexibility. You made a custom chip for a custom workload. Are we sure that the software innovations for Gen AI have settled down enough to invest billions of dollars to design and manufacture 1 million plus XPUs? Fixed function chips. I mean, after all, it might take $1 billion to design them and then billions more to manufacture all that. And take note, look, if they're being deployed in 2027, they're being designed right now. And yet we have innovations happening all the time still. DeepSeek, for example, they had some optimizations for their V3 model to make it more efficient during training and during inference. And of course, what did they run it on? GPUs. So the question is, what software innovations are just around the corner that might not work well on a custom ASIC? GPUs, of course, given their flexibility, can support these architectural innovations and optimizations. And the way I like to think of this is GPUs have a large surface area for absorbing software innovations as they kind of come down the pike. Okay, so let's get technical for a minute. Let's think more about this, because again, one could still say like, well, hey, at the end of the day, it's still all just transformers, and those are all just matrix multiplication anyway. So are things really going to change at the end of the day? So let's look at this Mamba paper. Let's say you're making an ASIC and it's very tailored to transformer LLM workloads, like what Etched is doing. Is hardwiring special circuitry for the self-attention mechanism for transformers risky? Attention is a fundamental performance unlock for Gen AI, right? So that's totally here to stay. I mean, attention is what made Gen AI work. Likewise, is it risky to build custom memory hierarchies and access patterns for KV caches? I mean, these are essential for improving the latency and throughput of transformers. If you're going to have transformers, you have to have a KV cache. Won't we always need those? Well, the problem with transformers today is that the computational and memory requirements of self-attention grow quadratically with the length of the input sequence. So if you want to feed in 1 million tokens, it's going to take terabytes of memory. On the other hand, researchers are exploring alternative architectures today, and have been for a while. This paper's been published for quite some time, that offer linear scaling, such as state space sequence models, SSMs like Mamba. And in theory, linear scaling means 1 million input tokens would only require megabytes of memory. So let's say you wanted a multimodal transformer model and you wanted to give it a video of the Super Bowl, so you could ask it questions about the game, about the commercials, whatever. That would take terabytes of memory, lots and lots of memory. But if you wanted to give the same, video or clip that's 1 million input tokens to some other architecture, it would only require megabytes of memory. So it would be way easier and faster, and it'd fit into, fewer chips. Or I should say servers. Anyway, the whole point of this isn't that Mamba's going to rule the world. If it was, wouldn't it be ruling the world already? But if the point is, if innovations like state space sequence models take off, or other innovations that are coming down the pike, will they run on transformer ASICs? So if Google and not Google, but if Broadcom's XPU customers are working on designing the next generation of AI ASICs that they'll deploy in 2027, and they're designing it right now, and let's say that it happens to be tailored to transformers, would something like this run on it? Of course, it probably would, because it's all matrix multiplication, right? But the circuitry for self-attention would be dead silicon, because something like Mamba doesn't have self-attention, or it does things differently. And then the memory for the KV cache might not be used. And the overall design of the system, the sort of data flow and the memory access patterns, might actually be less efficient than just implementing this on GPUs in the first place. Now, this is just an example, and not all AI ASICs are going to be that custom. Some of them might be much more flexible, like Google's TPU. But the more flexible it is, the more like a GPU it is, and therefore the less performance and power gains compared to a GPU. So in that case, why not just stick with the GPU, especially if it's evolving every year and you're getting more compute and you're getting better software and getting better networking? So back to this point, if the architectural innovation isn't well shaped for the particular custom ASIC, then the ASIC is not a perfect substitute for a GPU. On the other hand, of course, AMD's Instinct GPU is a perfect substitute for Nvidia GPUs if AMD can catch up on system performance, developer experience, and software ecosystem. So in my opinion, those Broadcom 2027 SAM dollars are at play, right? I'm not convinced that it's guaranteed that that's all shifting to millions of XPUs. Now, secondly, AMD's Instinct, their value prop is really about TCO, but TCO hasn't been a priority for these 4 hyperscalers yet. So far, GPU demand has been fueled by the race to scale pre-training. And as we covered already, pre-training is at a plateau. In the meantime, inference demand is showing signs of life. I mean, ChatGPT usage is growing, reasoning models are driving increased inference compute needs, and DeepSeek's showing us that they can optimize inference workloads. So if you're a hyperscaler and you're running inference and it's starting to scale, now you have to start to balance tokens per dollar. So throughput, latency, right? Everything's a trade-off. If you want to make it cheaper, but you might do more batching and have more users, but it might, you could have great throughput, but it could increase the latency. So there's lots of knobs to start tweaking. And interestingly, we're seeing that some of the largest inference workloads are being cost and performance optimized right now. And the big dogs like Meta, Microsoft, and OpenAI are choosing Instinct, or at least they're starting to kick the tires on Instinct. Now, to me, that's a great sign. OpenAI drives the majority of inference workload today. And so if they're exploring cost optimization with AMD, that feels quite promising. So another argument for AMD in the long run is that although their software isn't performant enough today to express the hardware, to fully reach that sort of max flops, the theoretical flops that you see in the slide decks or on paper, the software has to get better. And then of course, it's not also just about performance. It's about like how quickly can you how quickly can a developer get in and start writing code and shipping it and be performant and not get hung up with integration and bugs in the ecosystem or tooling that's missing that they have to maybe build or make better. Now, AMD's been saying since like late 2023 that software is a super high priority. There's a nice article from Sally at EE Times from like late 2023, and they're saying, hey, this is the number one priority. Yet throughout most of 2024, progress remained opaque. ROCm progress remained opaque to the public like us, right? And it's a little bit lip service unless they show and tell, right? Unless they show us that it's improving. I'm sure it was improving. I'm sure for their, right, like OpenAI and Microsoft, those guys are trying to inference probably at scale. And I'm sure all of AMD's engineers, software engineers, are just focused on making that experience as great as possible for those customers. But for the rest of us, it's hard to know that. Now, the tide is turning. Here's Anush, and I took his Twitter and made it really big. Anush is starting to own the narrative for AMD, and he's going out and talking to engineers about ROCm. He's the founder and former CEO of Nod.ai, which was acquired by AMD in late 2023. And Anush has totally emerged as the voice of AMD's AI software team in sort of a public evangelism role, trying to persuade the engineering community that AMD cares and they're committed and they're improving it. And in my opinion, there's no better spokesperson to talk to software engineers about ROCm than a software engineer working on ROCm. So if he says it's improving and he can ship the code and show the pull request to prove it, that's pretty meaningful. That's walking the walk. And I just thought it was cool. I wanted to call it out quick. Maybe you've seen this, but check out his tweets. I think they're pretty cool. We're here to help. We're working hard to earn your trust. Thank you for being a customer. What are your issues? I'd like to fix them. And this is great customer service. So as far as software goes, I think AMD's developer ecosystem is definitely showing signs publicly of life and improvement. And I think, we can trust that the big customers who have the most to gain, and of course they have the most software developers too to help make it better, they are kicking the tires, they're using it. I don't see why it wouldn't improve to the point of sort of closing the gap on, hey, how quickly can someone new, but who's familiar with, writing CUDA, for example, get in and start writing, some code and doing some small training runs and seeing that it's working. Of course, it's a marathon, right? Remember this a couple slides ago, 20 quarters. It's a 5-year journey. So ROCm, a tiny bit of progress, awesome. Not out of the woods, but it sure seems like they're on the right track, and they're doing a better job of, AMD is doing a great job through Anush of telling us about their progress. But what about competing at the system level in the long run? So historically, bears have said, well, not only is AMD's Instinct doesn't have as great as software, ROCm's not as good as CUDA, but also Nvidia has InfiniBand and NVLink. They've got communications advantage. Now, AMD recognizes this, and they're working on industry standard initiatives like UA-Link and Ultra Ethernet to compete and catch up, if you will, on scale up and scale out technologies. And furthermore, AMD acquired ZT Systems to help with their systems level design, right? Because it's all about the systems level design and integration. And according to this quote, Forrest Narad said that those contributions, even though they're not even done, I don't think they've totally closed the whole breaking out part of the ZT Systems business and keeping the engineers and selling off some of the business. And yet ZT Systems folks are already contributing a little bit to the MI350 series, but definitely they play a major contribution to the 400 and beyond. So I think that's a positive sign that AMD understands and they're working on it. It just takes time. And then lastly, I thought this was an interesting point, a little, hypothetical. So let's see if it comes true. But, so far we've been making the case for chip level flexibility of GPUs, I didn't say that right. GPUs have a large surface area for absorbing software innovations. Maybe that's chip level, but then we said it's all about system performance. And but what about system level flexibility? So the question here is, can AMD differentiate by creating data centers that can absorb and support system level innovation? So not just like absorbing software innovations, I guess, but really about absorbing system level data center configuration innovations or component innovations. And the argument here, I can never get the hands right on this because it's flipped, is that instead of just saying, here's our reference design, here's what you get, that especially with the help of ZT Systems, AMD recognizes that there's some modularity, and if innovations come to play, that they will be nimble and be able to include those in their systems. And this is also a point that Lisa made in her Stratechery interview that I referenced earlier. So finally, if I hadn't repeated enough, this will all take time. I think there are fine and fair arguments for Instinct to chip away and to at least hold along with TAM increase in the long run. And I think that they can hold their own against custom ASICs. I think that there's a great place for custom ASICs. And as I go behind the paywall, I'll kind of explain all of this at chipstrat.com and the long-term view. I will say though, because I probably haven't repeated enough, it will all take a ton of time. Software takes time. Hiring people takes time so that you can write better software. Networking improvements, especially with industry consortiums, takes time. Ramping 350 takes time. Ramping 400, which is really, I think, where we'll start to see some, performance gains and competition at the system level. That totally takes time. So we're not talking like next quarter, right? And even the macro shifts from training dominated demand to inference heavy demand takes time. So if you go read the rest of this article behind the paywall at chipstrat.com, I give my 2 cents on Instinct's opportunity in the near term. What are realistic expectations in the near term? And then what is the opportunity in the long run? We'll look at a few challenges that are still ahead, and I'll give next steps that AMD should consider to maximize their chance of success in the long run, to own the narrative with investors, with potential customers, and speed up Instinct adoption. So thanks for making it this far. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me your feedback, subscribe. I'm going to start putting these on YouTube. Send me an email or comment or something. Just happy to hear any feedback. Thanks for watching.